It was a cold night when FBI Special Agent Mark Reynolds unlocked his front door and stepped inside. His day had been long and exhausting. After spending more than 10 hours working on a high-profitable case in Washington, D.C., all he wanted was a hot cup of coffee and some quiet time with his wife, Lisa. Their 17-year-old son, Jake, was out at a party with his friends, so the house was eerily quiet. Mark hung his coat on the rack and started walking up the stairs. Something felt off. The house was too silent. As he reached the bedroom door, he noticed it was slightly ajar. His instincts kicked in, the same instincts that had saved his life many times in the field. He slowly pushed the door open, expecting to see Lisa asleep. Instead, what he saw shattered his world. His wife was in bed with another man. But it wasn't just any man, it was his son's best friend, Tyler. Mark stood frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The betrayal, the rage, the disgust. It all hit him at once. Tyler and Lisa both scrambled, caught in the act. Tyler pulled the sheets over himself, his face drained of color. Lisa, shaking, grabbed her clothes. "Mark?" "It's not what it looks like," Lisa stammered, but the words felt empty. Mark took a step forward, his eyes locked onto Tyler. His voice was eerily calm, but underneath a storm raged. "You, my son's best friend? In my house, with my wife?" Tyler tried to speak, but no words came out. His hands trembled as he looked for an escape, but Mark was blocking the only way out. As an FBI agent, Mark had seen the worst of humanity. He had looked killers in the eye, faced down criminals without flinching. But this was personal. This was a betrayal deeper than anything he had ever imagined. He reached for his gun. The cold metal felt familiar in his grip. His finger hovered over the trigger. One shot, that's all it would take. But then he clenched his jaw, closing his eyes for a brief second. If he pulled the trigger now, his career would be over. His life would be over. Lisa screamed, "Mark, please, it was a mistake. I love you." But you did this," Mark whispered, his voice like ice. And now someone has to pay." Tyler, sensing the impending doom, suddenly leaped from the bed, trying to make a run for it. Mark reacted instantly, firing a shot into the wall just inches from Tyler's head. The gunshot echoed through the house like a death sentence. Tyler collapsed onto the floor, hands raised in surrender. Lisa rushed to Mark, grabbing his arm. "Please, don't do this." Mark turned to her, his face now devoid of any emotion. "You destroyed everything, Lisa." At that moment, there was a knock at the front door. A sharp, urgent knock. Jake was home. Mark's hands trembled. If Jake walked in and saw this, what would happen? Would he witness his father becoming a murderer? Or would he see his mother for what she had done? The question remained. Who would die tonight? The knocking at the door grew louder. Mark's grip on his gun tightened as he turned his gaze toward Lisa and Tyler, who were both frozen in fear. Jake's voice came from outside. "Dad? Mom? Are you guys home?" Lisa's eyes filled with silent pleas, begging Mark to put the gun away, to not let their son see this nightmare. Tyler, still on the floor, was breathing heavily, his hands raised in surrender. Mark's mind raced. His rage screamed for him to pull the trigger, to end Tyler right then and there. But a part of him, buried beneath the fury, knew that if Jake walked in and saw his best friend dead, everything would be over. Mark wasn't just looking at the end of his marriage anymore. He was staring at the possible end of his relationship with his son. He lowered the gun slightly, exhaling sharply before whispering, "Not." Lisa nodded frantically. Tyler swallowed hard and stayed motionless. Mark turned and quickly stepped out of the bedroom, closing the door behind him as he hurried down the stairs. His heartbeat was pounding in his ears as he reached the front door and unlocked it. Jake stepped in, looking exhausted but cheerful. "Hey, Dad, you okay?" Mark forced a nod, shoving the gun into the back of his waistband. "Yeah, just a long day." Jake kicked off his shoes and stretched. Man, that party was crazy. Tyler left early though, said he wasn't feeling good. Mark's jaw clenched at the mention of the name. He forced a neutral expression. Yeah? When did he leave? Jake shrugged. About an hour ago, I think. Then he frowned. Hey, where's Mom? Mark hesitated, his pulse quickening. She went to bed early, feeling tired. Jake nodded. Cool, I'm gonna grab some food and head upstairs. Mark exhaled, nodding, forcing himself to stay calm as Jake moved toward the kitchen. The moment he was out of sight, Mark turned and climbed the stairs again, every step feeling heavier than the last. When he entered the bedroom, Lisa and Tyler were still exactly where he had left them. Lisa's face was pale, her lips trembling. Tyler looked as though he might pass out from fear. Mark locked the door behind him. Get dressed, he growled at Tyler. Now. Tyler scrambled for his clothes, pulling them on with shaking hands. Lisa remained motionless, staring at Mark with wide, desperate eyes. What are you going to do? She whispered. Mark ignored her, turning to Tyler. You're going to leave this house, and you're never coming back. Tyler frantically nodded. I swear I won't ever. Mark stepped forward so quickly that Tyler flinched. If I ever see you again, if I ever hear your name again, you will disappear. Do you understand me? Tyler nodded so fast it looked painful. Yes, sir. Yes, I swear. Mark grabbed him by the collar and yanked him toward the window. He unlocked it and pointed outside. You leave through here. If Jake sees you, I won't stop myself next time. Tyler hesitated for only a second before scrambling out onto the roof and carefully lowering himself down. Mark watched him go, ensuring that he disappeared into the night before locking the window behind him. Lisa sat on the bed, silent tears streaming down her face. Mark, I don't know what to say. Mark turned toward her slowly. You don't have to say anything. She wiped at her tears. Mark's expression didn't change. You're lying. Lisa broke into quiet sobs, but Mark just stood there, looking at the woman he had loved for years, the mother of his child, the person who had just shattered his world beyond repair. Then he turned, unlocked the door, and walked out, leaving her sitting alone in the dark. The only thing on his mind now was what came next, because one way or another, this wasn't over. Mark descended the stairs with mechanical precision, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air in the house seemed to grow thicker, as if the very walls were closing in on him. His mind was in a haze, running through 1,000 scenarios, each one darker than the last. He reached the kitchen, where Jake was rummaging through the refrigerator, oblivious to the storm brewing upstairs. Mark's heart raced. Every part of him wanted to tell Jake the truth, to confess everything that had just happened, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he shatter his son's world like that? How could he destroy the last shred of innocence his child had left? Jake turned around, holding a soda can in his hand. You sure you're okay, Dad? You look off. Mark nodded quickly, forcing a smile he didn't feel. Just tired, kiddo. It's been a long day. Jake eyed him suspiciously, but Mark's poker face held. The last thing he needed was Jake sensing the tension, the complete unraveling of their family. You sure you don't look okay? Mark cleared his throat. I'll be fine. Go ahead, get some rest. You've got school tomorrow. Jake nodded, taking his soda and heading toward the stairs. All right. Good night, Dad. Mark didn't respond, just watched as his son disappeared into the hallway. He heard Jake's footsteps fade as he reached his room. Mark stood there, staring at the empty space where his son had been. A sense of dread washed over him. He didn't know how much longer he could keep pretending everything was fine. He knew deep down that this moment, the one where he'd turned a blind eye to the betrayal and pushed his son away from the truth, would haunt him forever. But it wasn't over yet. Mark's instincts, honed through years of training, told him that this wasn't just about the affair anymore. There was more to it. Tyler's involvement went deeper than just a moment of weakness. This felt like something planned, something deliberate. Mark's eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. It was late, too late to be dealing with any of this. But he couldn't sleep, not when there were so many questions swirling in his head. He needed answers, and he wasn't about to get them by waiting around. His gaze settled on the phone. He reached for it, dialing a number he knew all too well, the number for his old colleague, Detective Laura Hayes. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Mark, is everything okay?" Laura's voice sounded calm, but Mark could hear the edge of concern in it. He hesitated, weighing his options. He could keep pretending that everything was fine, that this was just a fluke, but deep down, he knew he was too far gone for that now. "I need your help," he said, his voice low. There was a pause on the other end. "With what exactly?" "I don't think this was just an affair, Laura. I think Tyler, Jake's best friend, was involved in something bigger, and I think it's been going on for a while." Laura's tone shifted, no longer casual. "What makes you think that?" Mark exhaled slowly. "Because everything doesn't add up. The timing, his actions, the way he left earlier tonight, it all feels off." Laura was quiet for a moment. "All right, I'll meet you at your place. Let's figure this out." Mark hung up the phone and stood in the silence of his house. The weight of his decision settled on his shoulders. He had just crossed a line. His partnership with Laura would involve investigating Tyler and everything that led to this moment. And if Tyler was involved in something darker, more dangerous, Mark would have no choice but to pursue it. But even with that certainty, Mark couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut. He'd never been able to protect the people closest to him, not when it mattered most. And now, in his own home, with his own family, he didn't know who he could trust anymore. Mark made his way back upstairs, knowing there was no way he could face Lisa right now. He stepped into the bedroom where Lisa was still sitting, her back turned to him. Her shoulders were shaking as she cried quietly. He stood there, staring at her for a long moment, but then he turned away. He couldn't deal with her right now. He had too much to figure out. Mark walked into Jake's room, his heart heavy as he stood at the door, watching his son sleep. The peacefulness of Jake's face seemed so out of place with the chaos surrounding them. "I'm sorry, son," Mark whispered, though he knew Jake couldn't hear him. "I wish I could protect you from all of this." But it was too late for that. The damage was already done, and the truth was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. Mark's thoughts spiraled as he stood there, looking at his son. He had to fix this, somehow. He had to protect Jake from whatever dark reality lay ahead, even if it meant losing everything else. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Mark's heart skipped a beat. It was Laura. He quickly walked downstairs to answer it, ready to plunge deeper into a nightmare he had no idea how to escape. Mark took a deep breath before opening the door. Detective Laura Hayes stood on the porch, her sharp eyes scanning his face. She knew him well enough to see that something was very, very wrong. "Talk to me," she said, stepping inside. Mark shut the door and leaned against it, running a hand through his hair. "I found Lisa in bed with Jake's best friend." Laura's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Mark continued, his voice laced with exhaustion and anger. "It wasn't just an affair, Laura. Something about Tyler doesn't sit right with me. The way he acted, the way he ran. It felt like there's more to this." Laura crossed her arms. "You think it was a setup?" Mark nodded. "I don't know, but I need to find out." Laura sighed. "All right, let's start with the basics. Where's Tyler now?" "I let him go," Mark admitted. "For Jake's sake." Laura gave him a look but didn't press it. "Then let's dig into Tyler's background, see if anything pops up." Mark led her into his office, where he powered up his laptop and began searching through databases, using his FBI clearance to access records. As they worked, a chilling discovery unfolded. Tyler wasn't just some reckless teenager. He had a sealed juvenile record, something that had been buried deep. Assault charges, theft, even suspected involvement in a previous case that had connections to an organized crime ring operating in the area. Mark clenched his fists. Lisa had no idea who she was messing with. Laura's face was grim. "And neither did you." Just then, Mark's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should have killed me when you had the chance. Now it's my turn. Say goodbye to your son." Mark's blood ran cold. He shot up from his chair. "It's Tyler. He's coming for Jake." Laura was already reaching for her gun. "We need to move now." Mark sprinted up the stairs, heart pounding. He burst into Jake's room, only to find the bed empty, the window wide open. A note was left on the pillow. Too late. Mark's vision blurred with rage and terror. His hands trembled as he gripped the note. His worst fear had just come true. Tyler had taken Jake. Mark turned to Laura, his voice low and deadly. "We find him. And this time, I don't let him go." The hunt had just begun.